It is the Dynasty Roundtable. We are here. We are live, and we are going to today get. It's kind of like a fantasy show and a dynasty show, all packed into one efficient, show. Because Matt and I were talking, and we think that in an hour show that maybe we cover too many players. So we've dialed back the number of players that we normally have on our show sheet. I think this was evident when you and Tyler did the show without me, and it was like a perfect hour. And what was the common denominator there? It was you didn't put up 24 players to cover like I usually do.
I thought you were gonna do yourself a disservice there and tear yourself down a little bit. The main contributor there was that Tyler literally had a hard out at 7. So if it helps to hear, we had no other choice but to put out an hour episode because he had a 7:00 out. But I thought it would be a good little practice run, and I think there's plenty of time for variety within the show. There's going to be topics we're going to want to talk a lot about, but there's also going to be some times where we're going to want to do a little compact show for the people, and that's what we have today. And man, you can call me Steve Ballmer because I'm fired up to be here, man. This is like you said, it's a fantasy and dynasty show. We're talking 2024 breakouts, so we can apply this to all formats. And in mine and your list, I have people who I'm very convicted about. I have heavy conviction for a lot of people on this list, and I think it's going to make for some really good conversation tonight.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I've done a lot of work, like more work this year than probably any other year, just breaking down players, and I feel very strongly about obviously the rookies we covered. We went through rookie season and we covered rookie drafts. But even heading into redraft season now, as we're in the middle toward the back half of June right now, I feel more prepared than ever. And I feel like I say this every year, so I don't know if it means much of anything. But as far as the work that I've put in and the analysis that we've done, both of us together for Player Profiler, I feel like we are in a great spot. Like we might be the people. I don't want to toot our own horns too much, but the work we're doing with the draft kit, the articles we're putting out for the people, like we're in a great spot to give advice. I guess they'd call us experts. I guess that's why we have a show. I don't know.
Some say.
But I feel great about the plan, like the even the redraft plan that I'm putting together and the players that I'm going to target. So yeah, you said it. This episode, I'm excited for it, and I'm fired up, as Steve Ballmer would say. So Matt, do you want to lead us off with your first player?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it's funny that you bring up the draft kit because my first player is who I submitted my first video cameo for the draft kit. Maybe the only one, but if this year is anything like last year, it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks before it releases, where we're just going to be putting together a lot of videos. But Diontae Johnson is just a smash pick at ADP. So he's risen a few spots over the past month or so. He was at wide receiver 47. Now he's going at about wide receiver 44. And even then, this is just an asinine ADP. The people need to be way more excited about Diontae Johnson in 2024. He's a certified target hog who's always carved out a significant share of his team's passing opportunity. We look at his historic opportunity metrics. He has no season under a 23% target share since 2020. He has averaged 15 red zone targets and 20 deep targets, that's targets of 20 plus yards per season since 2020. He's finished inside the top 20 in expected fantasy points per game in 3 of the last 4 seasons. And he has a top 8 fantasy points per game finish on his resume. And he now gets a QB upgrade. I understand Bryce Young had his faults last year, but he is a better quarterback than Kenny Pickett. He is a better quarterback than Big Ben at the end of his career, although we can argue that Big Ben's inability to throw downfield helped Diontae Johnson. But regardless, the offense, while you may be inclined to say the Carolina Panthers were one of the worst offenses last year, and the Steelers are a better offense overall in general. So this is a downgrade. But Pittsburgh only finished with 7 more red zone trips on the season and averaged just 4 more points per game. Not significantly better. And Dave Canales, as we know, is an offense igniter. The Bucs were 13th in pace of play last season and 11th in passing percentage. And the Panthers were 20th and 27th in those respective metrics. Diontae Johnson is a first read favorite, and he can reach his wide receiver 1 potential again, top 12 wide receiver potential again, in a featured role as Bryce Young's wide receiver 1. He's going to work the slot. He's going to get open at will, and he'll be siphoned targets in what will be a much improved offense from last season. His opportunity share should have him priced closer to a top 16 receiver than a bottom 36 or even right now bottom 45 receiver. This market on Diontae Johnson makes absolutely no sense to me. We saw what Thielen was able to do with this target share in that offense. We need to be applying the same thing to Diontae Johnson. Thielen had 3 top 5 finishes last year. That's the type of upside we have with Diontae Johnson, and he is not being marketed that way at all, whether we're talking redraft, we're talking best ball, we're talking dynasty. He is mispriced all over the place.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought up Adam Thielen, because that came out of nowhere, right? The Adam Thielen first half of the season, and you mentioned it there. 3 top 5 finishes for Adam Thielen, but this was a team that was in desperate need for target earners. And it's kind of embarrassing when you look at the targets that were earned by the Carolina Panthers last year. Adam Thielen, not even close, was the leader in targets at 137. And then it was Jonathan Mingo, who was super inefficient with his targets. Like, he caught like barely half of his targets. And then DJ Chark is next on the list. He's not on the team anymore. And then it was Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. But those are the top 5 target earners. And then it goes Terrace Marshall, Tommy Tremble, Hayden Hurst, blah, right? So we know Terrace Marshall's not happening. So who does that logically turn to, or who should we logically turn to in this offense? And it's the classic, like, oh, Carolina sucks. We don't want these players. But I'll say, yeah, and yes, Carolina will suck this year. But look at what they did. They're doing everything that they can to support Bryce Young. They signed 2 offensive linemen, one Robert Hunt for over $100 million, the interior of the offensive line. That's going to be huge for Bryce Young. Diontae Johnson's going to be huge for Bryce Young, because, as you said, he can separate. He's still a really good wide receiver. And they drafted Jonathon Brooks, Jatavian Sanders, and Xavier Legette as well. And Xavier Legette, I think, complements Diontae Johnson very well on the outside. So again, I love that pick, because again, you can't really find a number 1 wide receiver. There's one that I can think of, and maybe we'll talk about him later, that you can draft later that is a number 1 wide receiver on an offense that's just going way too late. But I want to talk about how the entire offseason has been a ringing endorsement for George Pickens. Like, George Pickens, to me, like, you look at everything the Steelers have done. The first thing they did was get Kenny Pickett the hell out of there. They signed Russell Wilson and traded for Justin Fields. So they have 2 bites at the apple there. I think 2 possible upgrades for to replace Kenny Pickett. I think Justin Fields would be an upgrade over Kenny Pickett. Somebody was trying to fight me on that on in the YouTube comments, and really trying to argue like, oh, Russell Wilson's not an upgrade over Kenny Pickett. It's like, I don't, respectfully, sir, I do not agree with you whatsoever. The next thing they did was they traded Diontae Johnson. So this is a perfect player that to talk about next. Thus, George Pickens became the unquestioned wide receiver 1 in the offense. And then the NFL draft came. And you might think, well, the Steelers are going to pick a wide receiver in a wide receiver rich draft in the first round, in the second round. No, they didn't. What they did was they upgraded the offensive line in rounds 1 and round 2, Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier. And it wasn't until round 3 where they added Roman Wilson. And Roman Wilson is a perfect slot complement to George Pickens being the alpha outside receiver. And then, according to The Athletic now, they're fine just having their wide receiver 2 battle, duke it out between Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson. And there's 1,000 other list of names. I think I forgot about Des Fitzpatrick or Tez or something. Fitzpatrick is in there too. Yep. Yeah, so I clean forgot about him. I'm not gonna lie, but they're just fine with their wide receiver 2, which tells me that they're really happy and comfortable with George Pickens. And so when you break it all down for fantasy football, for dynasty football, fantasy football, George Pickens being 23, just turned 23 years old. He has the profile we like. He's in a situation that we like now with Pittsburgh. Last season, he saw over 100 targets in that putrid offense. Everything points to George Pickens having a breakout season this year. So what do you think of that? What do you think of George Pickens this year?
Yeah, I liked Pickens as a player coming out of Georgia, and obviously that love for him has pursued past his draft day picture, all these antics that he's up to. He's a guy you want to root for, and a guy I'm certainly going to root for. I'm going to have a good amount of him. You know, there are concerns about his profile, particularly an analyst, one of the better dynasty analysts out there. Or I guess dynasty is not necessarily his game, but now he's on a Fantasy Points Dynasty podcast. Ryan Heath kind of pioneered a new metric, first downs per route run. It supposedly correlates better to fantasy points per game. And that's kind of a metric where Pickens sticks out like a sore thumb. Now, I'm not necessarily super well versed in researching this metric. So, I'm going to go ahead and note the concerns. But we know Russell Wilson is an improvement. And we know that Diontae Johnson leaving is going to create a huge hole in this receiving core. If you don't think that some of those targets are going to be funneled over to George Pickens, then you're lying to yourself. Where I start to worry is how we saw this Broncos offense operate last year. Sutton was a first read favorite. He was getting a lot of looks in the red zone, in the end zone. But at the end of the day, Sutton had a 20% share of the offense and only had 90 targets. So the hope is that this is because the Broncos were bad. They had a horrible offensive line. Russ was forced to check it down. Sutton's more of a downfield player to where Russ simply wasn't having the time of day to get the ball downfield to Cortland Sutton. And I think this is a reasonable assumption to make. We do know that the offensive line is going to be an upgrade from Denver. Despite what you want to think about Arthur Smith, he does know how to run an offense and get the most out of who he has. Atlanta should have been a way worse team. There are some malpractices with Bijan Robinson, but in terms of putting a quarterback in a good situation, Tannehill was good under him. Mariota, Heineke, Ritter were good enough under him. So Russell Wilson's in a good spot here. So I'm worried about what Pickens' true ceiling is on a seasonal perspective. I love him in best ball because of the spike week chances. But in a seasonal or dynasty point of view, like you said, from dynasty, he's 23 years old, right? So he's a guy that's going to have better situations to come even than this. And this is one of the best situations he's been in his entire career. So from a dynasty perspective, I'm ready to invest. I have shares. From a best ball perspective, I love where his value's at. At a redraft perspective, I think he could be a guy that ends up failing you because of inconsistencies. But I'm not going to lie. I'm willing to take the risk because I love the guy, and I think he's too good for me to start worrying too much about the surrounding factors.
Yeah, and you brought up Arthur Smith, and I think that benefits us when we're in our leagues with our our league mates, because they're gonna have that sour taste in their mouth that Arthur Smith left there, and they're gonna assume, well, they're gonna throw to Van Jefferson more than they're gonna throw to George Pickens because Arthur Smith is the Grinch of fantasy football. I mean, established the run, made a whole thing about it, right? Didn't they? If I
Yeah,
remember right.
they did.
But I'm just looking at wide receivers around where Pickens is going, and I agree with you. I think it's a better dynasty bet than it is a best ball or redraft bet. It's his ADP is kind of getting up there right now because it's gone up 9 spots in the last week. It's kind of crazy. Like he's at player number 41, so the hype is real. Wide receiver 28 right now. And he's right around T. Higgins is right in front of him. Amari Cooper's right behind him. Christian Kirk, the Terry McLaurin is about 9 spots behind him at wide receiver 31, 9 spots overall. I'm not gonna lie to you. I like Terry McLaurin quite a bit too, and he's probably cheaper in Dynasty to get than George Pickens if you're looking for a veteran. But out of all those wide receivers, I mean, T. Higgins has got to compete with Jamar Chase and newly drafted Jermaine Burton. I guess Amari Cooper's dealing with a weird contract thing. He didn't even go to camp. So if you make me choose between all those options, even in redraft or best ball, I think I would choose George Pickens. But chat, let us know what you think about George Pickens in the chat, because Gerard Dean, shout out to Gerard Dean, thinks Calvin Austin is the wide receiver too. And I would say, I don't know about that. Respectfully. I don't know.
Yeah, I respectfully don't know about that either. I respectfully don't know if there's actually 2 QBs in Pittsburgh because Tomlin's been on the record from the beginning saying Russ was his guy, and Justin Fields, look, he stinks. I'm sorry, but he stinks. Like, he's not even getting good camp reports. How bad of a sign is that? Like, he's not even getting camp buzz. The rumor is he stinks in camp.
No, the rumor was they were trying, like, the stupid. I don't know if there was any credence to it because nobody's talking about it anymore. But they were trying him out as a kick returner, is what they were doing early in camp or early in mini camp.
It might
I don't
come
know,
to that.
OTAs, whatever it is. I get them all mixed up. But let's anyway. Chat. We'll get to some of your comments. Let us know what you think as we go along. But Matt, I think we're ready for your player numero dos.
This is a quicker one for me, but just as much conviction as Diontae Johnson. And yes, I know that this player is broken out before. But we're talking about people who are going to break out in 2024, and respective to ADP, respective to where he finished last year. Chris Godwin fits this list. Talk about another mispriced wide receiver. That is Chris Godwin. So we already know in the Buccaneers offense post Dave Canales, it's gone on the record saying Godwin is our slot guy. He's going back to the slot. Dave, experimented with Godwin last year, did his own thing with him, and we're going to put him back to where he likes to be the most. And let me run through his finishes in every season where he has ran at least 40% of his routes from the slot. Wide receiver 15 in fantasy points per game, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 15, and wide receiver 2. That is in 4 consecutive seasons prior to 2023. So he's going back to this age-old role that has very much benefited him. He averaged 16.9 fantasy points per game over those 4 seasons. That's very good. And you can get him for pennies. He's going in the 30s right now. Multiple rounds after Mike Evans, and we are going to see a career resurgence from Godwin. You can put it on the books right now. I am giving you a money back guarantee that he is a top 20 receiver in fantasy points per game.
I love it. I mean, over the last I mean, you don't have to go back too far to find a season where he was the wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game. That was 2021. And somehow, I don't know what's going on with him because his yards per reception. Oh, I know what's going on, actually. Never mind. His yards per reception was 12.3, the highest it's been in the last 3 years. Targets, fine, 131. Second most he's ever gotten. Yep, second most in his career. Only 2 touchdowns last year. This, if you want to make a simple case, if you just want to keep it simple, stupid,
Touchdown
like
regression.
I have to,
Boom, done.
boom, exactly. That's all you have to do because there's no way that he's catching just 2 touchdowns. I mean, what's the over under in Vegas right now? It can't be 2, it can't be 1.5, right?
Probably 4.5 if I were to
It's got to
guess.
be at least, it's got to be at least 4.5 for that offense for Baker Mayfield, who was actually playing really well last year. Like, it's got to be 4.5. That would be my guess. And if he gets 5-6 touchdowns with that target share, with let's see, what did he get last year? 23% target share. Yeah. Even if it's a little bit lower than that, I like that. That's a good call by you. You're really good at this. Nice job.
Thank you.
My next one might have some people, because the village might burn down after this one. We might have to disarm people from pitchforks. I don't know how people feel about it. All I can do is tell you how I feel, and I'm telling you, this is the year for Kyle Pitts, and it's because it doesn't matter. I don't understand. Somebody's gonna have to explain, because I would not consider myself a best ball bro. I'm not out there in the streets as much as other people, and these player agnostic takes that they have, and we have to get a portfolio of players. I'm just not that kind of guy. I just draft who I want, and I get it. Correlation's a thing. Like, I understand best ball, but somebody's gonna have to explain to me why Kyle Pitts is tight end 6, player 61 overall, and why Drake London is like being drafted near the top of the draft, because that's the first thing that stood out like a sore thumb. It's like, how can these two things be true? Like, if you want to make the case that Drake London's going to be awesome, then how can you make the case that Kyle Pitts shouldn't be, a round or 2 ahead of ADP as well? Because that's about where he was going last year. I get it. It fluctuated. I remember Kyle Pitts in the 60s. I remember Kyle Pitts going in the 80s. So I guess it's at the top end of that. But from a dynasty perspective, like, how can you not be in on Kyle Pitts? Because Sam Laporta ruined tight ends for us, right? Ruined tight ends for us because it was like understood and recognized that tight ends take a while to break out. They do. And when you go to keep trade cut, Kyle Pitts in a Superflex league, player 54 overall, tight end 5. And I'm like at that price, Matt, I'm willing to take the chance. I'm willing to, and I get it. I understand. Everybody's a spurn lover out there of Kyle Pitts. He's the perfect one. He's the 10. He's the 10 that disappointed you and stood you up at the bar. I understand. Okay, I get it. I understand you're hurt, but along comes Kirk Cousins, and now that perfect 10 of a player, that perfect 10 that Kyle Pitts is, just the perfect prospect. Like 6'6", 245, runs a 4.49. I mean, what and he's not, we don't have to worry about him blocking because he's a receiver. He's a receiver. He's not a tight end. He's a receiver. Like, that's what he is. He's like a beefed up wide receiver. That's what these tight ends are these days. And so at tight end 5 on keep trade cut at 23 years old for Kyle Pitts, going to turn 24 this year, 24 years old this year. I believe he's younger than Dalton Kincaid. I'd have to check that. Like, it's crazy. Let me see. Let me just check. Yeah, he's younger than Dalton Kincaid, who's, I believe, ranked ahead of him in these dynasty rankings, which is wild. I don't know, Matt. Tell me why I shouldn't like Kyle Pitts, and why do people love Drake London so much? Because to me, one would have to go with the other, right?
Yeah, it's I think Drake London's been the main beneficiary of it. We would have expected if Kyle Pitts was truly getting the Drake London treatment, then Kyle Pitts would be tight end 3-ish right now instead of tight end 6. And if I'm willing to make a bet on one of these two players at cost, it's going to be Pitts, and it's going to be Pitts 10
Yes.
times out
Thank
of
you.
10 because he's so
Thank
much
you.
more affordable despite being in a wonderful situation. The bull case for Pitts is very obvious. This comes down to, from a short-term perspective, the health of Cousins and the ability of Penix should Cousins go down. Dynasty, I don't necessarily care how this year turns out. If he disappoints again, maybe he'll be cheaper. But we've also played this game every year with Kyle Pitts. So if there are, again, extenuating circumstances where it's like, Cousins went down, Penix was okay, but there's an adjustment period. Maybe we roll the dice again. But then again, you're going to be getting him for tight end 7, probably tight end 8 at the lowest, if something happens. So I'm not gonna, I don't know, pussyfoot around and see if I can wait until the value dips a little bit more. I'm gonna get him now. And I'm going to bet on Michael Penix Jr. That's the real bet. You're going to bet on Michael Penix Jr. being worth his salt. Because if Kirk Cousins plays all 17 games and is healthy, we're probably looking at some pretty good numbers for Pitts. At the very least, his hindrance should be from the Falcons maybe being a little bit more run heavy than we would like. Even so, if he's getting 24% of a 35th percentile passing opportunity from Kirk Cousins, who's historically putting the ball in the air, very often. So if we take, a 35th percentile, 25th percentile Kirk Cousins passing attempt season and give Kyle Pitts 24% of that with his ability, and if this defense continues in a bad division to put their offense in good starting field position, I think there's so much upside for Kyle Pitts. It's very easy to see like an outlier 11 touchdown season, like just getting peppered in the red zone. No Jonnu Smith either, who was earning opportunities, not just taking them, not just being given to them by Arthur Smith. So I'm definitely willing to invest in Pitts well before I'm going to invest in Drake London.
I think a good player to look at is TJ Hawkinson, because TJ Hawkinson is also similarly a really good tight end. And when you look at when he was with Kirk Cousins, right? I mean, we're like tight end 7, tight end 4 in fantasy points per game, right? 129 targets. Like I think that's what we're looking at for Pitts in Dynasty. You know what I mean? Like and I suppose that's about where he's getting drafted. But the upside case is tight end 1 overall. Like he could be the guy that replaces Kelsey and at the top of the tight end list. He could easily outscore Sam Laporta this year. Like he's the one guy in that tier, like below, that's still like in the top 6, 7, 8. And I get it. If you want to play it safe, I understand. If you want to go Evan Ingram for a season or two, fine. I like Evan Ingram too. But he's going to be 30 years old, and I'd still believe he's got a few good seasons left. But Kyle Pitts could be your long-term answer at tight end for like, and just even a week-to-week option, because this is a completely different ball game now with Kirk Cousins and an entirely new coaching staff that the offensive coordinators from the McVay tree. So it's going to be a similar type offense to what they ran in Minnesota with Kirk Cousins. It's completely different. And from what I'm seeing, Drake London's getting the boost and Kyle Pitts isn't as much. And when you look at just the prospect profile of both guys, to me, it's not close, guys. Kyle Pitts is a way better, more athletic player at his position than Drake London is at his position. Like, at least we have something like his rookie season, right? Where he was, I think, the first tight end since Mike Ditka to get 1,000 yards in a season. Like, at least we have that. With Drake London, we don't really have anything.
Right.
Like, we have nothing to go on. And I get it. Every season, it's a new projection. I understand that, but I'm just kind of worried. Like, I'll say this: I won't say it's the same thing as Christian Watson was last year, but it's given me the same vibes. It's given me the very similar. Oh, everybody. There's not one person out there that I can find that's like, yeah, Drake London. I don't know about him, except for me. Like, and I'm like, why is that? Why is that, Matt? What, like, because the obvious case is that he's the number 2 option being drafted as the number 1 option in the offense, right?
Right.
So I don't know. Like, my alarm bells are going off, and Drake London to me, like, man, that's risky. That's risky up there. Like, it's a bit too rich for my blood, especially in a redraft league where I can just wait 4 rounds and get who I think's a better player, albeit at a different position. So I don't know. Let us know how crazy you think I am in the chat.
Before we go to break, yeah. I got it. That we're going at it in the chat over Chris Godwin, and I need. Sorry, Plumber, but I got to take you to school, man. So.
Oh, we're going to school.
First of all,
why'd you have to do this, Plumber?
First of all, Harry, great point. If you're not putting in regression to a now going to be a 31-year-old receiver who just put up 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns on 16 yards per reception, I don't know what to tell you. And there really isn't no preferred target. Like, there's this cognitive bias that because Evans had 13 touchdowns, that he's like Baker's guy, when in fact Godwin had 4 less targets on the season as Mike Evans. So they were both getting their fair share of work. Godwin was just not in the right spot that he's supposed to be in. He's supposed to be the guy working the slot. He's not a Z. His career has shown that he has performed worse when he's in that position. And look what happens. Someone who's historically a 75+% catch rate kind of guy goes down to 66% in his first year with Baker Mayfield. So even if we just adjust for that correction, right? We give him 10% more of his catches. That's 8 more points on the season. Even if we don't go with the 12 yards per reception, we say 10 yards per reception. That's another 8 points with yardage. We give him 3 more touchdowns on the season just to get to 5. Just 5. He gets to 243.1 on a 17 game pace. That's 14.3 fantasy points per game. I promise you that is easy. That's definitely top 24. That's pushing top 20. Similar outputs would be where he finished with like 14.9 in 2022 and was wide receiver 15. So there's nothing that has to improve with Tampa Bay. Nothing. We just are expecting some career regression back to where Godwin normally finishes. And we don't even have to think about Mike Evans. Like, we can just toss him aside and say, even if Godwin just corrects to where we would normally expect him to be based on his career, he's probably going to finish a top 24. I do agree with Plummer in the fact that I would be very cautious to project the Tampa Bay offense to improve, or at least significantly improve, this season. My argument here is that there doesn't need to be any improvement for that to happen for Chris Godwin.
Yeah, I think that's like, I mean, it's not that hard. Like, simple touchdown regression, or back to the mean for Chris Godwin seems to be in order this year. That's the most likely scenario. And Mike Evans, like, is another one of those players that is being drafted in the 2nd round. I think he was going in like the 5th or 6th last year, if I remember right. So that's another guy that's steamed up, and now he's another year older. And yeah, I guess the quarterback's still the same, but you would think that, Chris Godwin should like he's getting a very similar target share. Like
we got a
it just
question
makes sense.
after class. Mike Evans only 2 more red zone targets than Chris Godwin on the season. Thank you. Good night.
All right. Well, on the other side of this break, on this message from Underdog Fantasy, we will be discussing at least 4 more players. So if you haven't done it already, click the like button, subscribe to the channel. We are coming at you every week on the Dynasty Roundtable, so you want to be tapped in for that. But stay tuned, stay with us after this message from Underdog Fantasy.
This episode is made possible by Underdog Fantasy, and Underdog Fantasy is the leader in best ball. When you go to join an Underdog Fantasy best ball draft, it fills very quickly, especially now. It's Best Ball Mania season, baby. Best Ball Mania 5. I can't believe they're at Best Ball Mania 5 already. $15 million in prizes. They're giving out $15 million with $1.5 million to first. Playing in best ball leagues makes you better. It helps train you on player value and strategy. And Underdog offers a lot more than just best ball contests. They offer pick'ems. My new favorite, the golf pick'ems. But they have the NBA pick'ems, baseball pick'ems going on throughout the offseason. Hit the pick'ems, back to best ball, hit the pick'ems. So use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've increased the maximum deposit bonus. It was $100. Now it's up to $125. When you get the Underdog app, use promo code Underworld. And go draft your ass off.
Go draft your ass off right now at Underdog Fantasy. And why, you might be wondering, and I'm just going to touch on this really quick. Why would you run an Underdog ad on the Dynasty Roundtable, Seth? How does that make sense? Well, I'll tell you how it makes sense is because of this episode that we're doing right now. Where does redraft and Dynasty meet or touch? Like, are they worlds that get close together? Or do they actually ever touch? And I think that redraft and drafting in these best ball leagues gives you a great idea of how the public values players right now. So you can use that information to your advantage. And if you're a win now team, you can price your players accordingly, or you can buy those players according to some of those prices and use that to your advantage. If you're a rebuilding team, you can say, hey, I have Mike Evans and I know he's 31 years old, but it looks like he's going to score a lot of fantasy points this year, or so some people think. So I should be at least getting a second round rookie pick for him, right? So these two worlds, redraft and dynasty, while they are separate, they do go hand in hand with each other as well. And you can use one to strengthen your game and the other, and you can use the other to strengthen your game and the other one, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to touch on that real briefly because I do play Underdog. I will admit to everyone in the world that I'm a dynasty guy. I'm not necessarily a best ball bro. So I hope maybe to be someday with Tyler Knabley on his channel. Go subscribe to Tyler's channel, by the way. He's killing it over there on the Best Ball Barbecue. But Matt Babbage, is it time for another player?
Player number 3. And we're going back to Carolina, baby. We're going back to Carolina. Fortuitous of Harry Snowman to be talking about Jonathon Brooks in the chat because, man, there are not a lot of players not a lot of running backs that I like more at cost than Jonathon Brooks this year. So I'll save the Dave Canales effect till the end. So at Texas, 66th percentile college dominator rating, 72nd percentile target share. All right. So he can command a significant opportunity out of the backfield. Check. 75th percentile college yards per carry. All right. He can efficiently produce at the next level. Check. 72nd percentile size adjusted speed with a fair frame to accompany it. All right. He can handle significant touches at the next level. Check. The one caveat I will say is that Cody Carpentier is on the camp that Jonathon Brooks never truly led a significant share, 66th percentile college dominator rating. Obviously a lot of room for improvement. So Cody does have some fair counter arguments to Brooks's ability to command a large workload. He did tear his ACL last year, but I'm not really worried about that. Breece Hall, Kyler Murray, both players that returned to play within 10 months and were by all stretch of the imaginations, very, very okay last year. Murray was okay. Breece Hall was incredible. We saw his ACL did not bother him that much. He hardly even was doing preventative maintenance throughout the season. And these young guys, modern medicine, it's truly incredible. And Brooks, as we know, went to the premier ACL doc in the entire country for NFL players. So I'm not concerned at all about his surgery or recovery. There is going to be that ramp up period, that 8-week ramp up period. But as we know from Breece Hall, there's still plenty of ceiling in that period. And weeks 8 through 16, 17 are what it's all about anyway. So even Zach Ertz, Dusty Zach Ertz came back within 10 months at like 34 years old, and he tore his knee to shreds. So I'm not concerned about his availability. And the ramp-up period is baked into his cost. Now let's get into the Canales effect. Rachaad White, 16 weighted opportunities per game last year. That's pretty damn good. Number 4 in total weighted opportunities. Number 9 in red zone touches and a 12.7% target share. So he loves to feed his RB1. And he stepped into Carolina and looked at Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard and said, yeah, we need somebody else. So they traded up in the second round to take Jonathon Brooks as the first running back off the board. And in a video that was recently released, Canales said, quote, I love that dude. He is exactly what we're looking for. I don't care what you think about Jonathon Brooks' talent. Even I didn't necessarily consider him to be far and away the RB1 or anything like that in the pre-draft process. But he's going to be absolutely fed. He's going to be a bell cow. And there's this cognitive dissonance that bell cow running backs on bad teams can't produce well in fantasy points per game. And it's not necessarily true. And so Brooks is going to get work on this team and has a very realistic path to being a top 12 running back this season just because of the level of opportunity that we can project for him. And because of this, Brooks will be my most rostered running back this season.
That's bold. That's strong. And I really like it because I for all the reasons that we talked about Diontae Johnson, like I think on the surface level, like your guy who's not as plugged in as we are, people in the chat would go, Jonathon Brooks got drafted by Carolina? That's a bad landing spot. And I remember sitting down with Memphis Young on draft night at the draft house going, we love this landing spot. Like, this is actually fantastic because of what you just mentioned, because of the Dave Canales fact, because he's clearly the most talented running back on the team. It's definitely the one with the highest draft capital. I can't remember where Miles Sanders. I think Miles Sanders was a 3rd round pick. So they trade, like you said, they traded up to get him. 2nd round pick, late 2nd. Okay, I was wrong. But Jonathon Brooks, like you mentioned it, like just fits perfectly in this offense, in an offense that probably won't be good. The team won't be that great. What does that mean? It means a lot of negative game script situations for a pass catching running back with an offensive coordinator that loves to feature his running back, that targeted this running back, that is saying things already, like you just mentioned, about this running back. And I think the only reason why he isn't going higher in drafts right now is because of the injury concerns. And you basically just squashed those because he got hurt. Like, yes, it's not ideal for a player to have a torn ACL, and there's always concerns that come with that. But the price is being baked into his current price, because if he was not injured, I have news for you. He'd probably be like a 5th or 6th round pick, but instead he's going in like the 8th round.
It's a similar thing with Breece Hall too, where what happened. I mean, I told you and Tyler Knably, like I think it was after a show one day last year, I was like, guys, like Breece Hall's, we're going to get news probably soon and his price is going to start going up. And then especially when Hard Knocks came around, he jumped up a full round. And so when we see Jonathon Brooks on the field for the first time, he's at RB like 26 right now. He might creep up inside the top 20 by the time the summer's over.
Well, he's already creeping up because according to 4for4, he's RB 22. And I guess this goes clear back to April 5th. And on April 5th, he was 119 overall. And today, as we are sitting here talking, He's player 87 overall and RB22, as I mentioned. Still, I love him at that price too, because I agree. He's got top
he is
12.
RB22. My mistake.
No. It's fine. But he's got the top 12 upside, especially in that situation. Like and it's an improved situation in Carolina too. It might not be like I tell people all the time, and this goes for Bryce Young too, who I really like as well in Dynasty. You might not agree with all the moves that they make. Right? It's very similar to Atlanta. Like we might not have agreed with that they took Michael Penix Jr. We might all think that that's a stupid pick, but they still took him at pick number 8. Right? We might not agree with drafting a running back that high or bringing in Jatavian Sanders or whatever, or trading for Diontae. It all helps Bryce Young, right? And even bad offenses still have to score. And guess who the number 1 target is in Carolina? Diontae Johnson. Guess who the number 1 running back is? Jonathon Brooks. Don't kid yourself, right? There's going to be real opportunity, a ton of opportunity for those guys, and they have the talent to capitalize on it. And this offensive line is going to be better, and Bryce Young's going to be better. It's going to be better, guys, and it's going to lead to fantasy points.
Yeah, it's a great call here real quick, too. Like, the Jets offense was trash. Like, I didn't even really consider that in the argument, where they were one of the lowest outputting offenses in the entire league, and Breece Hall was RB3 in fantasy points per game. So, great call there.
Oh, that's an unbelievable, like, that just shows you how good Breece Hall is. Like it's because he was playing he played all 17 games without Aaron Rodgers, aside from a play or two. So yeah. So my next player, who is my next player?
Who is your next player? It's a good question.
Who I wanted.
You had a late sub.
I know. I know who I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about Zack Moss. I want to talk about Zack Moss, and then I'll talk about the other guy who I replaced the other guy with. And we can maybe we can tease that. Maybe I'll reveal who that player was at the end of the show. But I was talking to Maddie Kiewum earlier today. We do a show, The Hurdle, on the Executives of Fantasy Football. On that channel, you should go follow that and check out the draftrankings.com, because that's where Cody, Maddie, and I do a bunch of work too on the side. We were talking today, and it just sometimes when you have this is why I love talking things out with people. And Maddie said something today that just made my brain explode a little bit. He said, if you can figure out the Bengals backfield, you might have a league-winning running back on your hands. And I'm like, yeah, I think you are correct. Just look at how they've used Joe Mixon in the past. Like, Joe Mixon has never been an efficiency king, but he's gotten there with his opportunity. And when you look at Zack Moss, we don't really have much to go on, but in the time that he was playing with the Colts, I mean, we have RB10 in week 2, RB5 in week 3 last year against Baltimore, RB2 in week 5 against Tennessee, and then Jonathan Taylor came back shortly thereafter, right? But when he was the starting running back for a short time, he showed us that he can be super productive playing behind a good offensive line in Indianapolis. Now he goes to a situation in Cincinnati where it really feels like they want him to be the guy. Sure, Chase Brown is there. I understand that. But how have they used running backs historically? They've generally just featured one bell cow running back. That's really all we have to go on in Joe Mixon, right? So if you're making me bet right now on June 19th, 2024, I think the answer to the Cincinnati Bengals backfield is Zack Moss, because just Chase Brown feels like more of a pass catching, third down type of running back, and that's going to have its benefits. But the guy who's going to be running in between the tackles, who's going to be on the field the primary amount, or the primarily in the times where we want them to be on the field, is what I'm trying to say. Like in those red zone, power runs, it's going to be Zack Moss. And I think Zack Moss has a real chance to, I'd have to look at where he's getting drafted right now. I think it's in the similar range as to where DeAndre Swift.
I think he is RB26.
There you go.
That is what I was thinking of when I said the Brooks stat.
Yeah, because in RB26, I feel like that's drafting him at his floor because that's basically saying, to me, that's saying, oh, he's going to split time with Chase Brown, you know. Whereas if you think if you think he's going to split time with Chase Brown, then you better be drafting Chase Brown right at his ADP. And I don't have a problem with sprinkling in a little Chase Brown into your best ball portfolio. That's not how I roll. I'm going to have mostly Zack Moss, probably not much Chase Brown at all. But to me, the answer to the Cincinnati Bengals backfield, based on everything we know about the coaching staff, based on how they've used running backs in the past, is Zack Moss. And he showed us that he could do it, albeit in a short amount of time. And the beauty is he's very, very cheap in Dynasty, and he's very reasonably priced in redraft as well. So he's definitely going to be one of my targets, especially when I'm thinking about who's my RB2 going to be, who's a target if I just go straight 0 RB. Like Zack Moss is right there for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did it. And I didn't really know how to feel in this backfield. So, but entering this conversation, I leaned Zack Moss, but it was more of I'll have exposure to Zack Moss. I'm not super into the idea of Zack Moss, but I'm starting to be more convicted on Zack Moss after this conversation. So if you've paid enough attention to this show, if you heard me talk about like James Cook, these numbers I did with Chris Godwin, I have a certain process where I go about projecting opportunity for people. So Joe Mixon, we're looking at about historically over the past like 4 seasons, about 15.5 weighted opportunities per game at about a 75% opportunity share. So we're looking at about 20.7 weighted opportunities per game up for grabs in the Cincinnati Bengals offense. Now, I do think that there's going to be a heavier lean on the passing game, but that could benefit Zack Moss because Tyler Boyd is no longer in the equation. They do have Jermaine Burton, but the fact that he is not an established veteran with that connection of Tyler Boyd means that there is a better chance that Moss could outkick his projection in terms of targets. But let's say that he takes this share of touches at about a 60% clip, which is fair if you're considering. That means that Chase Brown is very involved in the offense if he's getting 40%. So this is kind of the bear case for Zack Moss. That's 12.4 weighted opportunities per game, right on par with where he was last year. And typically running backs with that output are inside the top 30 in fantasy points per game. Moss finished as the RB28 in fantasy points per game last year. And we insert him into a better offense that's going to score more touchdowns. There's a lot of upside with Moss. I do worry about what that floor is if Moss gets an 8 or lower percent target share, if Chase Brown does push for more touches. So I'm worried about the floor, but he does have top 24, top 20 ceiling. And he's got a pretty fair cost right now.
Yeah, and there's a real world too where he falls into the end zone quite a bit and has a great like double-digit touchdowns. Like that's very much on the table for Zack Moss. So yeah, I think you laid it out pretty well there. So we'll see. I mean, and if you're, like I said, like if you are skeptical of Zack Moss, like I think taking a shot on Chase Brown is just fine. It's just not my particular brand of tea because I'm not a huge fan of the prospect. I know he flashed last year, and we actually talked about
like
him on the
touches.
Dynasty Roundtable a long time ago, if you remember that. And because he had a terrible Senior Bowl performance, I think that's what it was.
Oh yeah,
it was bad. But Matt, we have just about 5 minutes. I don't know if we're going to make it a perfect hour. Probably not. But who's up next for you?
So we just released our newest version of the Win Your League series with Player Profiler. So we wrote about year 2 breakouts, and I'm going to cover mine here at the end. I felt convicted as I did some research towards the end of the day here, and Tyjae Spears has just immense upside. We're looking at a guy in 2023 who finished with 10 weighted opportunities per game. And if you're new to the program, I mentioned this metric a lot for running backs. Just to do it briefly, a weighted opportunity essentially corrects for red zone carries and targets. Essentially takes the type of touch and correlates it to which type of touch, whether it be a target or a red zone carry, a goal line carry. It correlates that with how many fantasy points you'd expect from that type of touch to basically say the level of significance of the opportunity that this back is receiving. So he only had 14 red zone touches and 2 goal line touches. So decent opportunity, a lot to be desired, but he was playing behind Derrick Henry. And so now we swap Derrick Henry for Tony Pollard, who is definitely a known guy that you sub out at the goal line. He can't really convert a lot of goal line touches into touchdowns. That's always been his problem. And Spears isn't a prototypical goal line back, but he has a better BMI than Tony Pollard. He's actually on paper more suited to handle goal line work than Tony Pollard. And he may only have one ACL, but if we've learned anything from Todd Gurley, this is the type of player you lean on early in their career because unfortunately, we know that arthritis is going to set in for Tyjae Spears at some point in his career, and he's going to start slowing down. I believe the Tennessee Titans knew this when they drafted him. It was a known, this is a pretty bad thing for a running back entering the league to have. It's a pretty big scarlet letter, but he should be used early. There's no point in preserving him as a scat back or a satellite plus back because he has a short shelf life, a shorter shelf life than most running backs. So you got to get use out of him soon. And when we look at backs with at least 12 weighted opportunities per game since 2017, remember that Spears finished with 10. They average 15.5 fantasy points per game. And the 25th percentile output, so very low in the totem pole, is 12.95 fantasy points per game. He finished with 10 fantasy points per game last season and was the RB 38. So even if we give him just a slight bump in opportunity, he has the potential, even in the worst case scenario, to score 3 more fantasy points per game than he did last year. And if you want to say, but Spears isn't going to get 15 plus weighted opportunities per game with his profile. So this is kind of an unfair way to look at it because guys like Rachaad White with 16 plus fantasy points per game are obviously skewing that scale. Well, if you take backs that are between 12 and 14 weighted opportunities per game, the average is 15.5 fantasy points per game. And the average is 13.7 fantasy points per game. And the 75th percentile outcome is 15.5. So there are 2 spectrums we can put him on. Either he's going to get bell cow work and have bottom tier efficiency because of his profile. Boom. Still scoring 3 fantasy points per game more than he did last year. He gets touch squeeze with Tony Pollard because he's a satellite plus back and has average efficiency, 3 to 4 more fantasy points per game than he scored last year. There's an easy path to Tyjae Spears becoming a top 24, top 20 back. It doesn't have to come from much because he has that big playability. So I'm not concerned with Spears' profile because with his talent, he doesn't have to get much more to massively outkick his ADP. It's a complicated way of going about it, but if you want to read the article, read my tweet about it, it may make a little bit more sense on paper.
And if you look at what's going on Underdog right now, the market is changing a little bit because Tony Pollard has moved down 7 spots, while as Tyjae Spears has moved up 9 spots over the last week or so. Like the ADP is correcting itself. And just to add on to your point, because I love Tyjae Spears this year, I think he's the better out of the 2 running backs. Like the only thing that I can think of when I'm trying to put things in the con column for Tyjae Spears is the injury you just mentioned and the fact that this new regime signed Tony Pollard to come in here, but Derrick Henry left. So they had to, I guess they had to replace him with somebody. I don't know. They decided to bring in, spend relatively a decent amount on Tony Pollard, decent contract. But you look at any sort of metric you want to look at, And I get it. I think Pollard was dealing with injuries last year, so that factors in. But like you look at anything you like, true yards per carry, Pollard ranked number 42. Juke rate 38th, evaded tackle 16th, breakaway run rate 25th. If you just look at the efficiency metrics on playerprofiler.com, like Spears is better in yards per carry, yards per touch, juke rate, evaded tackles, and breakaway run rate. Like he's better in just about any metric you want to look at last year in part-time duty. And what really blows my mind is I thought Tony Pollard was supposed to be this pass catching target monster out of the backfield. Tony Pollard last year in full-time duty with a number 13 opportunity share amongst running backs, number 7 snap share, number 6 in weighted opportunities, was only 11th in targets amongst running backs, whereas Tyjae Spears was 9th amongst running backs in targets with 70. So these two players are going to eat kind of into each other's workload in the passing game, but I think it's clear the direction that Tennessee wants to go. They want to be a passing offense with Will Levis. That's why they brought in Calvin Ridley. That's why they brought in a left tackle and J.C. Latham, right? Yeah, left tackle. I can't remember if he's a right tackle or a left tackle. I believe he's a left tackle. They have DeAndre Hopkins, Chigakonkwo. They bring in another pass-catching running back to add to another pass-catching running back in Tyjae Spears. Like this offense, if Will Levis is average, it's going to be a good offense. Like Will Levis just can't suck because the receivers are good. The running backs are good. The offensive line all of a sudden is looking really good. That was the report out of The Athletic was about the offensive line. Like Peter Skoronski looks really good. J.C. Latham looks amazing. So they have Bill Callahan there now, who's one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL, if not the best. It's going to that makes it really good for whoever can sort of win out the competition. And the only thing that we have to go on for Tony Pollard is the team did sign him. Like this regime did sign him to come in to play, but Tyjae Spears was the better player last year. And I think the ADP on Underdog is catching up to that fact. So I love the Tyjae Spears call. And I'm actually going to go with my last player. I came up with a video idea, and I don't know if this is probably a stupid idea, but we'll see how it does on YouTube because it's scheduled for Saturday. So we'll see how it does. But I made a video, 10 players you should target with your last pick on Underdog, an Underdog draft. So basically like fantasy sleepers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're going to have to explain to me, like Daniel Jones, right, was the apple of everybody's eye last year heading into the season, because in 2022, he ranked number 10 in fantasy points per game amongst quarterbacks. And I'm just gonna list you some things, okay? And people can react to it how they want to react to it. It's fine, you know. Like this is what we're all here because we love fantasy football. I don't even know where to start. I'll just start with true completion percentage, because Daniel Jones ranked number 1 in 2022 in true completion percentage, number 5 in accuracy rating, number 7 in QBR, number 8 in true passer rating, number 12 in catchable pass rate, number 12 in red zone accuracy rating. And he even did what we wanted him to do for fantasy, which is he ran, and he's athletic. He was number 4 in carries amongst quarterbacks and number 3 in rushing touchdowns amongst quarterbacks, which is what propelled him to be probably, like what I remember, 3rd or 4th round startup pick in a Superflex Dynasty league. Now, look at what happens with look at what happens in 1 year to a player. He gets hurt, has a terrible season, or was not playing very well, even though he had a 67.5% completion percentage, playing behind one of the worst, probably the worst offensive line in all of football, had no time to throw. Now they've upgraded the offensive line. They brought in Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon to solidify the interior. They're gonna need those 2 young tackles to play better on the outside. They are banking on those 2 guys because they paid one of them in Thomas. So they need those 2 guys to play better, but they drafted Malik Neighbors, guys. in the first round. We know that like Malik Neighbors might be the best wide receiver that Daniel Jones has ever played with in his career. I have to go back and look at some of the rosters back in 2019 to really confirm that. But he beats the heck out of Kenny Golladay. I know that. So here's what I'm saying. Daniel Jones is currently like you can get him at pick 202 on Underdog right now. 202. And I think there are worse ways to spend your last pick or your second to last pick than Daniel Jones. And if you want to stack him with Malik Neighbors, like another one of those pass catchers, maybe Devin Singletary, you get the giant stack, makes you want to throw up in your mouth. But Daniel Jones, I think, could return value on ADP because I think that there's a real chance he finishes as a top 15, top 16 quarterback because the last 2 years, which is far more data than, just last year where he only played in 6 games and got hurt. In 2021, he was the quarterback 17 in fantasy points per game. And like I said, in 2022, quarterback 10 in fantasy points per game and looked to be trending up with Brian Daboll. And Brian Daboll is a pretty good coach too. So I like Daniel Jones in Dynasty. I like him in redraft. And I know it's probably a move that makes you want to puke in your mouth a little bit, but I think it's a smart move. I really do. What do you think?
I got a stat for you that I just whipped up. So he's going dirt cheap. What is it? QB 30, QB 33. Like, is he outside of the top 30 QBs right now?
I think he's like at QB 29.
Regardless, he is
just
way.
inside,
He is 29. He's way below 15, right? So if he's giving you QB 15 weeks, probably very happy with your investment. So since 2021, 42% of Daniel Jones's regular season starts were top 15 finishes. Nearly half of his starts over the past 3 seasons, that's including the disaster class that were the 6 games he played in 2023. 42% of his games he finished as a top 15 quarterback. I think that is all you really need to know right now to know that he is worth investing in as QB 29. Not to mention he has QB 10, QB 17, QB 15 on his resume in 3 of the past 4 seasons, not including 2023. He enters with the first wide receiver one in his career with Malik Neighbors. And the departure of Saquon Barkley could actually be good for him. It could mean more rushing opportunity, and it could mean more downfield passes with a less capable pass catching back. I know Singletary is very good, but he's not the explosive playmaker that Saquon Barkley is. So there's a lot of things to love about Daniel Jones because he's QB 29. So I love it.
Gotcha. We have Gerard Dean that thinks he's better than the top 15, 16. Yeah, I mean, definitely has the rushing upside. We have to look into this. Tim B put this, and I'd have to look into it just to know. But he says Daniel Jones will get the Russell Wilson treatment if the Giants aren't doing well. He has a $25 million guarantee against injury next year. I have a if that's true, that's something to consider. Thanks for that comment, Tim B. Fantasy Plumber likes it. Thanks to the chat, guys. You were awesome tonight. We didn't get to nearly as many comments as I. Hey, Fantasy Plumber agrees with me. How about that?
I think if they do that, we're gonna see a precedent come down real soon from the NFL on the NFL's. The NFL's gonna say you either got to stop putting these contracts in there or these contract clauses in there, or we're gonna. What's going to suck is like the first time it happens, it's probably going to be like a forfeiture of like a 5th round pick. But eventually, whether it's in this season, the next, or the one after that, we're going to see a precedent stricken where it's going to be a massive fine or a 1st, 2nd round pick. Something big is going to happen where they're going to say you can't just start sitting people because you don't want to pay them in case they get hurt. It's obvious tanking.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. I think Daniel Jones is a little bit different person than Russell Wilson. And I'm not trying to throw shade at Russell Wilson, but I think that relationship between the Broncos and Russell Wilson got so terrible last year that I just think it won't play out quite the same way with Daniel Jones. I think, like if I had to guess, I think they were trying to get Russ to take less money is what the problem was, and he wasn't willing to take less money. I have a feeling that Daniel Jones would restructure something. Like I feel like he'd be more willing to do that. He doesn't seem like the Russell Wilson type player, but I could be wrong. That's just me, an outsider's perspective of those two situations
No,
potentially playing out for Daniel Jones.
It's a good point too, because Daniel Jones can't really afford to like get that treatment. It's not really a good sign. He's got to be out there playing as many games as he possibly can to prove his worth. So I think that's a good point there.
All right, Matt, what do you have to plug before we wrap up tonight?
All right, I mentioned the Win Your League series. You can go find our latest edition year 2 breakouts on playerprofiler.com/articles. Myself, Seth, Theo Greminger, Maddie Keenwum, and Jason Allwine bringing you weekly series on different topics on how to win your league. Next week is going to be our favorite ADP value in rounds 1 through 10, so stay tuned for that. I'm working on an article on ambiguous backfields. I'll have that written up here probably by the end of tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that one. And as you mentioned, we're getting close to draft kit season, so be staying in tune with all the different things we have to offer for redraft. And then go check out the Player Profiler news channel. I'm live on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Central. Back again this week after a leave last week. And you can find that on the Profiler News YouTube channel and the Profiler_NFL Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah, you got to go check out the... Go ahead, sorry.
You can find my Twitter at Babbage_Matt10, Babbage_10.
Yeah, you got to go subscribe if you haven't already to Player Profiler News, because especially during the season, you're gonna want updates from Player Profiler News. It's going to be the easiest way to find out who's injured, at what the recovery times are going to be, who to pick up off the waiver wire, what should you do in your Dynasty leagues as far as trades go. They have a Dynasty show coming out too called the Dynasty Stock Market that they're gonna do over there. They're probably going to take our jobs, although Matt's already working over on the Player Profiler News side, so he's safe. I'm in trouble because Emerson Beery is over there, who's going to do some Dynasty content. And I think Brendan Booth, Jonathan Tuma is over there. And obviously it's all headed up by Bradley Stalder. Matt Babbage is over. Like, just tremendous, under the radar, like, people that are working their asses off to make sure that you're informed. So go subscribe to Player Profiler News. Like, do it now. You'll thank me later. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, subscribe. Click the like button. That helps us out quite a bit. That lets us know that you like what we're doing. So maybe we'll do more of it. Leave a comment too. Like, you can leave a comment telling us, oh, what kind of episode do you want next? We read the comments. We don't get back to all of them, but we read them. So let us know what kind of episodes you want. What kind of Dynasty content do you want? Let us know. There might be a chance that we do it if enough people are asking for it. So again, thank you to everybody. You can find me on Twitter at Seth _DIEWOLD. You can follow me on YouTube as well. TikTok, Instagram, all the things. You can find me on them all. I finally did that. And until next time, you know what we got to say. Nobody cares about Aaron Rodgers. Christian Watson, will he be back this year? I don't know. But you have to tune in next time to find out, maybe. And Wiseman for Heisman. We'll see you later, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.